Welcome to the Disruptance Podcast. The Disruptance Podcast is the show that disrupts the way entrepreneurs think to make them more profitable and impactful. Rethink tired and outdated business norms to welcome innovation and unlock your unlimited possibilities. Here are your hosts, Forney and Greg Fowler.
Eric, today's going to be a very special one that we're going to go to, and I want to start this off with a very specific quote from a wise man, Gordon Gekko, as we like to go through the fictional character Gordon Gekko, as we say. So I'll start off with this: the point is, ladies and gentlemen, that greed, for lack of a better word, is good. So, Eric, we're not necessarily talking about greed, but we are talking about the path to wealth. And I think money and the process of that and really diversifying. But from true practitioner perspective, there's a lot of ill advice that's thrown around. I would definitely love to dive into this with you. So where do you want to start with the path of wealth, when it comes to that?
Well, you hit the nail on the head, right? Most advice is actually pretty bad in general. And especially when it comes to wealth building and the path to wealth. And the reason why I say that is because, I just love to go to this stat, which is 78% of people who are on budgets out of the 82% of people in America, 82% of the population budgets, 78% of people who are on budgets live paycheck to paycheck. Therefore, if the advice around just have a budget and spend less than you earn was good advice, you would have more than 4% of the population who actually was not living paycheck to paycheck from that quantity. And so I think about the path to wealth is really like broken down into 5 different segments.
Love it.
Okay, so the first one is pretty obvious. And the first one is you have to get money, because we must all agree that it's hard to be wealthy without actually acquiring any money. Therefore, you have to get money. Then you have to avoid losing it, which means you need to have actually a plan to keep it.
Okay.
Now, there's someone who's going to go, what do you mean? Isn't lose it and keep it? Aren't they just opposites of each other? And the answer is maybe. We'll unpack why I separate them.
There we go.
And then multiply it and then transfer it. And so you have these kind of 5 paths of wealth, these 5 different stages around wealth, and you have to get it, you have to avoid losing it, you have to have a plan to keep it, multiply it, and then you have to transfer it.
Seems simple enough, right? I mean, I think as you're breaking this down, but the fundamental truths of it, there are percentiles, right, Eric? And you had mentioned a few there. There's a 1%, there's a 5%, a 10%, and so on. There is a very small percentage of the population who really understand wealth building, and even into the entrepreneurial space, and even to our audience here with Disruptance. So let's unpack that, man. I mean, let's really get down to the tactical advice, because as we were talking about before, everyone's basing it off of the same regurgitated information.
Yep.
So I want to hear it from Eric. I really want to get this out there to the audience for sure.
Greg, for me, I'm just a dumbass kid from Marklettville, Indiana. So I speak the language of dumbass, and so I like to make things real simple.
There we go.
When I remember these simple principles and fundamental truths that are always true in 1,000 parallel universes, then it multiplies the odds of being successful in the one that I happen to live in. And so the first fundamental truth that I believe is that if we have to start by gaining money or getting money, then it makes sense to understand what the principal equation of getting money is. And so rather than complicate it, here's how I think that you get money is, in order to generate income, you have to combine time and money and time and energy. Time and energy. So now just think, this was you were a little house on the prairie, and you would take your energy to churn butter over time, and that butter churning plus enough time created the opportunity to create value for the world, and someone in the world would give you the value for what you created as a byproduct of your time and your energy.
Wow.
Okay, so the amount of money that we get is in proportion to the amount of value the world perceives that we provide.
Okay.
Now, this triggers teachers, and I'm really sorry, but being a teacher is incredibly valuable to me as someone whose child is in school currently. Like, that's a wildly valuable job.
Likewise, yeah.
Well, now, the difference is that public school teachers, preschool teachers, professors, and those that founded the Khan Academy have varying degrees of the amount of money they get, which is in direct proportion to what the market has deemed their worth to the consumer. So Khan Academy has significantly more income than your daughter's preschool teacher. And it's because, for whatever reason, the market said that's valuable, and I'd rather pay whatever the cost was to acquire that widely distributed model of education. Which then takes me to this second portion of get income, which is understanding then, okay, so maybe I'm a teacher, which means I have what I'm going to call a specific knowledge.
Sure.
I have the knowledge of how to educate someone. I have the experience teaching someone. And what I'm missing in order to get maximum income is I'm missing visibility.
Okay.
So in order to generate maximum income, I need to have specific knowledge combined with my life experiences and visibility. Okay. Because could we all agree that if you had 8 billion people on this planet who knew who you were and what you specialized in and the experiences that you had, the value you created, money and wealth building would not be your problem?
For sure.
If 8 billion people knew who you were, then we wouldn't have a problem. Therefore, if you make $12 an hour or $1,200 an hour, the equation to generate a surplus amount of income is specific knowledge combined with experience with enough visibility to generate customers who will pay you for the value that you create. So I'll give you a firsthand example of how I applied this in my life. So I've always tried to earn extra money ever since I was like relatively young. And one of the easy ways to do this was like when I previously worked at Sherwin-Williams, right? And so I had this specific knowledge of how to paint and how to apply it professionally. I had the experience of running the business at that store. And what I then needed was essentially visibility in order for someone to hire me to combine my knowledge, my experience, my time, and my energy to create value. So I generated additional income by either painting houses, painting furniture, adding value by combining those items above and beyond whatever my daily income was by working my 9-to-5 job. So I have to get more than I spend, but the path to getting more than I spend is ensuring that I combine specific knowledge, experience with time, energy, and visibility.
And I like how you're talking about the get it aspect and really looking at it from active income, right? Normal people would say a career, a job, that sort of scenario is going to that income basis. I love how you're breaking it down fundamentally as far as, really the tall tale signs of how you're being compensated. And a lot of people will throw around, Eric, and I'd love to get your opinion on this, not only basis of kind of the directive, but the problems that you solve. And a lot of people say the bigger problem you solve, the higher compensation is then afforded to it, dependent on that. So what are your thoughts on that? I mean, solving problems, solving bigger problems. I mean, versus a general practitioner as a doctor, for instance, versus a neurosurgeon.
Again, it goes back to my fundamental truth that the amount of income that you make is proportionate to the amount of value the world perceives that you create. Therefore, so here would be an interesting example. What then would be, let's say you're a knee surgeon. I don't even know what that title would be. It doesn't really matter. But
I like it. Keep it simple. This works.
you do ACL, you do knee replacements.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, so you have a limitation on the amount of money that you can make, but you make more money being a knee surgeon than you typically do being the doctor at CVS, right? And that's because you have specific knowledge that is perceived to be more valuable. You have the experience of performing the replacement surgery that makes it more specialized. mobility is more important than the sniffles.
Yep.
Therefore, I've got additional value perception in the marketplace. Now, once I generate enough customers, then I'm going to have a surplus of income as a knee replacement physician compared to the CVS Minute Clinic physician. Okay, so that's one example. Now let's go up the ladder more and say the Dr. James Andrews or the what was the tendonitis, the whatever it is, Dr. James Andrews, who's like a knee replacement surgeon for stars and NFL players.
Yeah, sure.
Their mobility is more valuable than your mobility and my mobility.
Wow, good point.
Therefore, the perception of value that Dr. James Andrews creates is worth more because his customers are worth more. Therefore, they pay a higher amount because the success rate of recovery is worth more to those individuals than it is to you and I.
Wow.
And so if we went up even further, the person who then invents the knee replacement implant has the ability to actually create maximum visibility for their product. Wow. They have the ability to make the most amount of money because their visibility potential is the highest. They can get that product into as many knees as humanly possible because once they invent the product, they can then sell that to as many people, whereas the doctor is limited to the number of knees that can be replaced in one day.
Interesting. Yeah.
So when we think that combination of gaining money is the time and money creates the value you generate with specific knowledge, experience, and visibility.
Okay.
Khan Academy has greater visibility than my son's kindergarten teacher.
Gotcha.
Therefore, Khan Academy makes more money based on their visibility, even if the kindergarten teacher for Hudson is a better teacher.
Love that. And again, looking at the target audience, who's the end user into that and what reference points they have, plays a factor into it. So it's not as straightforward or simplistic as, hey, get a job. You're trying to get a job, make some money. I mean, there's lots of facets and variations to that. Yeah. So let's dive into the next one, Eric, as you mentioned. So you got to get it. So lose it.
Yeah. How do I lose it? Well, the number one way there's several ways, but let's start with the principles, and then we'll build up to my rules. So the principles of it is that that once I get it, I need to understand what are the ways to lose it. The best ways to lose money is who you marry. The overwhelming number one way to lose the most amount of money is who you marry, Greg.
I thought you were going to say something about the government or, Uncle Sam, but, there's another way. Well, your spouse. There we go.
Funny enough, the number two way to lose the most amount of money is taxation.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah. Your spouse will take half. The government will take up to 45% of it. So, so who you marry and then the taxes you pay are single-handedly the fastest two ways to potentially lose money.
Wow.
And then from there, we think is arguably the next most costly way to lose money is your health.
Okay.
We should all agree that if you're not healthy enough to go generate an income, you won't have income.
Well said.
And therefore, we'll talk about how do we solve these problems on the keep it side, but the way to lose it would be your health. Then it kind of goes down from there, which would be like what you think, what you learn, what you choose to protect, who you hire, the cost that you allow, the interest that you pay, and the inflation that takes money from you. And so what you think, what you learn, what you protect, who you hire, the cost that you allow, the interest you pay, and the inflation that taxes you.
Wow. So losing it in nature, that's a pretty tricky situation when you come down to it. And I think that's another instance that people would think how simplistic, but there's lots of layers to it. And from a personal experience and storytelling for me, I mean, the health situation, it's a real thing. I think when entrepreneurs are young and they're relatively healthy, seems to be bulletproof in nature. But I will tell you from firsthand experience, when a medical issue hits you out of nowhere, it is one of the most scary things on the planet to think, gosh, if I can't go to work, if I can't do what I do, how else is it going to work out? I know we're going to talk about, passive income as relative to active income, but to me, you're absolutely right. You're nothing without your health. You could be the smartest person on the planet. It's not going to mean anything at the end of the day if you can't actually
Yeah.
do the job that you're actually intended to. So good points for sure, Eric, on losing it.
Well, and so then you think about like what you protect really is a cousin of who you hire. And I, when you think about this, ways to lose it, one easy way to lose a lot of money is to be in a lawsuit, or to have casualty events, or to have accidents on properties or with assets that you own or businesses that you're in, to have liability or errors and omissions or any of the above portions of litigation that may actually cause you to lose a significant portion of the income that you got. It's pretty easy for a lot of it to disappear if you don't hire the right people to protect what you worked hard to generate. Therefore, it becomes then critical as you amass more money that you hire the right people to help create a protection strategy for your money.
Wow.
And that you then are conscious of the interest that you pay and ensuring that you at minimum outrun inflation with whatever it is you do with the money you have. Because all of those things become significantly costly. But the worst way to lose it is who you marry, and that be the tax component, your health, and then losing it to litigation or liability.
I mean, it's just inquiring a bunch of thought process. Hopefully everybody's tracking kind of where we're going with this. Eric, I do want to get your take on this thought process kind of into the lose it and or keep it category. Hopefully I'm not jumping the gun, but there's so many entrepreneurs and professionals. Okay. They understand, they get a fundamental career path, whatever that may be. They're starting to generate an income that they've never seen before. A lot adjust into a lifestyle funding mentality. So prior to, they made, let's call it 80,000 a year.
Yep.
And now they're making 570. They automatically suck up everything with a bigger house, the multiple cars, the lavish vacations, clothing, and they end up being right back where they were at the 80,000 mark. So that is, I feel, is a pretty large problem as you start to accumulate wealth, especially early on. So what's your perspective or thoughts on that as an issue?
Well, that kind of leads us perfectly then into number two, and I might give you an additional bonus point here and dot the I on what you said here. So
there we go.
So the keep it part then becomes being cognizant of the fact that we keep it by managing our emotions. Okay, so emotions become the way that we keep it, but we must create a strategy and a process and a system to avoid emotionally making poor decisions that would cause us to lose it. So I want to basically create a bunker of my emotions to ensure that I keep it. So I'm going to use automation.
Okay.
And then I'm going to do I'm going to have a strategy for my expense management, and then I'm going to have a protection strategy. Okay, so the way I'm going to keep it is I understand that all of my money spending decisions are emotional for the most part. And then I create automation so that I can eliminate the emotion part of spending. Then I have a strategy for how I filter whether I spend. And then lastly, going back to how do I protect the money that I have in surplus so that I keep as much of it as humanly possible.
Got it.
And the emotion piece then comes down to the question that I like to ask, and you talk about lifestyle creep. So then the question that I ask of myself is, what does money mean to you? What does money mean to you, and what does money give you? And so anecdotally, what I'll tell you is what I find is that most people, depending on where they are in their wealth building journey, is they have a different answer. Early, I believe, most of us, wealth gives us validation.
Right.
Wealth gives us validation. Does the world, or do people, or do my peers believe that I am accomplished or successful or worthy? And I'll judge that score by the amount of wealth that I have.
Right.
Therefore, when I get a lot, I become validated as someone who is worth more to the world.
Hmm.
At a certain point, you realize that no one actually gives a shit.
Right.
But most of the time I find you actually have to cross that threshold of getting just enough to realize no one gives a damn and throws a party once you get it.
Right.
And so secondarily, then most of the time what happens is after people get through the validation phase, then money provides security.
Hmm.
And so money provides you the security, because what invariably happens is when I ask that question, people always go, well, it gives me freedom. And I go, awesome. Freedom from what?
Oh, yeah.
And
Great
what
question.
freedom from is almost always like, well, freedom from like stressing about it. Got it. So what you actually want is security. You want to no longer need to stress about the fact that you'll run out in the future.
Right. Where's
Or
it
that
coming
you
from?
don't have the ability to provide the necessary things that are required at some unforeseen and unexpected time. So money typically provides something different to each person depending on where they are in their wealth building journey. But I find that it's most always validation and security.
Wow.
And therefore, I need to have a strategy to keep it if it's validation or security, either one. Because if it's validation, I will spend way too much money trying to impress people who don't care.
Well, and I want to touch on that again, Eric, because I think it's important. If anybody's tuning into this right now and they're in that potential validation phase, I mean, I can speak for myself at least into this. I wouldn't do it. I would say forget it. I would say forget the validation. As Eric said, no one cares what you have, what you drive, where you live. Ultimately, that is your own preconceived notions of what success looks like. I know that the earlier stages and phases of life that most people fall into that trap, as is said, but if you can beat the learning curve and really kind of take that to heart, boy, oh boy, you're going to be so much further ahead of everybody else who just kind of falls into that trap. And there's worse segments of that than others, but man, that's huge advice just in and of itself. Just don't do it. I get the security part of it, right? I understand that. But just go right to the wealth building process, taking that money and making that money work for you passively. Huge stuff, but yeah,
Well,
just wanted to say on that.
Well, I mean, then the best way to do that is to automate it. I like to think of it this way is, if there are Oreos in my house, Greg, I'm eating those damn Oreos. Okay.
Oh yeah, they're gone. They're gone, man.
It doesn't really matter. So no matter what I tell myself in advance, I'm eating the damn Oreos.
No doubt.
So what's the best way for Eric to avoid eating Oreos? Ensure they don't come in the house.
Right. Sure.
And therefore, I'm going to create a system to where they don't show up. So I could automate, and which we do, we automate the food that we order or in the meals that we buy.
Sure.
Right? I'm going to do the same thing with my money, which is when I'm going to invest it on a recurring basis. If I'm going to choose for that, let's say it's going to be in the lending component of money.
Sure.
I'm going to invest by lending my money to the S&P 500 for the S&P 500 to go invest my money in the top 500 companies so that I can have more money in the future. But I create an automation strategy for that portion of keep it and don't give myself the ability to make an emotional choice. So now we've got get it, the ways to lose it strategy, and the fundamental equation of how to keep it. So then we get to multiply it. And this is where the Dave Ramseys of the world come into play, right? Is they say, okay, money is addition and subtraction. And it's, it's earn more than you spend. And that's great, Dave. Thanks so much for explaining like the fundamental nature of gravity to me. I would have never gotten the simple mathematics if not. And yet the reality of it is the way we multiply money is we start by having a defined set of beliefs about the world. We have a thesis about how we think society and life works. I get really clear on that.
Okay.
And then I understand that assets plus cash flow over time is what multiplies.
Love it.
Assets plus cash flow over time multiplies. Okay. And so when I think about then what is a thesis? Well, your thesis might be that, I'll just tell you my three beliefs. my belief is that technology is neither good nor bad, but the technology will continue to happen whether we like it or not. Therefore, I can't ignore the fact that technology, I have to believe, if I don't believe that, I have to believe that technology will become less a part of our life in the future than it is today. Or I have to believe that we'll be more immersed in technology in the future than we are now.
Right.
Okay. So if I believe that we'll have more technology, then I can keep technology related investments on the table as something I potentially look at.
Well
If I don't believe that, I throw them out and I never look at them.
Oh, that's great. Great advice.
I believe I believe that technology is something that will be more pervasive, not less pervasive in the future. Okay. I believe that the fact that there is a housing shortage and a nation the size of America with this climate and so much heavily wooded areas is pure political genius. The fact that there is a housing shortage in this country is fascinating. And therefore, it makes sense to, I believe, based on that thesis, to keep real estate related investments on the table as something I might look at. And then lastly, I believe that there's never been a generation blessed with so much and yet demanded so much more for themselves while being so unwilling to share with future generations, quite like America's worst, the baby boomers. And so because they'll be the first generation in history to leave the world in a worse place than they left the next generation financially, the first generation to leave the next generation in a worse financial position than in any other time in history, I believe then that they will continue to make similar decisions of self-interest. And therefore, if I think about those three theses I have, which is that technology will not stop, that a housing shortage in America is political genius, and that no generation will have more and yet give so little, then it becomes easy to know, does this opportunity align with my belief about the world when I think about investing? And if it's no, then it's easy to ignore. If it's yes, then it's worth exploring.
And I think you're mentioning those three components into the kind of multiplier standpoint, Eric. There's so many different ways to diversify and to generate that passive income, after you're able to go through. And again, everybody's got their different, thought process. Just on nerdwallet.com, the top 11 passive income ideas for 2023. Dividend stocks, dividend index funds, ETFs, bonds and bond funds, high yield savings account, rental properties, peer-to-peer lending, private equity, content, real estate investments and trusts, crypto, and then money market funds. You touched on, into those, looking at it from that process. There are opportunities, I think, finding the fundamental truths to you and then looking to people that are around you that have had success into wealth. I mean, there's so many YouTubers and these fake gurus that are renting Lamborghinis that are telling you how to, get wealthy. It almost makes me think of Wolf of Wall Street, where the Jordan Belfort commercials where he's got all these girls in the helicopter and then the federal agents come and get him. It's just kind of funny as that nature. It's to be real with wealth and identify that is crucial. I do want to give our buddy Gordon Gekko another shout out here, and from the Wall Street film back in 1987, because a lot of it had to do with Eric. I would almost wish that Eric was saying this. Maybe we could figure it out with AI. But a quote from Gordon Gekko: "The richest 1% of the country owns half of the country's wealth, $5 trillion. 1/3 of that comes from hard work. 2/3 comes from inheritance, interest on interest, accumulating to widows and idiot sons, and what I do, stock and real estate speculation." So it's really interesting that Eric and Gordon are on the same page when it comes down to what they're putting their time, monies, and effort into.
That's hilarious.
It's just there, man. It's just
yeah. That's we're pretty much the same people. Well,
Oh,
you
I love
mentioned
it.
the word passive investment, though, and I want to unpack it just slightly. And so I
Oh,
think of it
please.
as the difference between, because passive investment is like the sexy thing that people talk about on the internet that most that mention it don't understand it. But
Mm.
passive income, there's really only two types of income. There's the income that you generate by exchanging your human capital, your energy, and your time.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the income that you generate from the money that you invest. So there's money that makes money, and then there's people that make money.
Mm-hmm.
When your money makes money, it's typically considered to be passive. However, there really are two options, even for when your money makes money. You've got active and you have passive.
Mm-hmm.
So when you think about, okay, now I've got passive income, and it can be either active or it can be passive.
Mm-hmm.
The two options are I can either lend it or I can own it.
Mm-hmm.
No more, no less. Lend it or own it. Lend it or own it. And I'm trading my time for money and my energy, or I'm trading my money for money. I then either choose, do I own it or do I lend it? And then how much maintenance does it need when I own it or lend it? The amount of maintenance or the amount of me time that's required determines whether it's active or whether it's passive.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
I think the misconception is believing for most that passive income means I do nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And the reality of it is that, like, it's possible that you could do nothing and still have that you could have active, you could have income generated from your cash that's invested,
Mm-hmm.
that then, in order to get a return on, requires active income. So that would be if you invest in businesses in which you have to consult, be on board, advise, show up every so often, teach, train, lead, motivate, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people are on boards. They, like, Warren Buffett is, quote, an investor, but Warren Buffett also has a job for the companies he's invested in. That's not just entirely passive income for him,
Well
even
said.
though he's invested in those companies.
Mm-hmm.
When I lend money to you to rent my house on
Mm-hmm.
contract, I collect the rent from you every so often, or I then litigate you if you don't pay. Therefore, my owner financing has some active component to it. And then oftentimes real estate is capital invested to generate more cash flow. And short-term investments, Airbnbs, those are active investments, even though I'm asking my capital to generate me more capital.
Yeah, but I like the fact that you're kind of taking that and diversifying the understanding, Eric, because everybody tries to sizzle and sexy it up. And yes, it is passive and active. And you're saying, oh, you don't have to do anything. Wake up and you got checks hitting your account. And I think ultimately to have that understanding. But to that thought, though, Eric, so as the diverse income is then created. You've got your active position in your career path. Then you have investments that are yielding a certain return and there's monies exchanged. Are you in the belief that that's the money that then you can play with a little bit, be a little bit more personal to tone with? Or are you on the school of thought that everything should just flat out be reinvested? I mean, is it a cold, hard line? How do you live that lifestyle? Because ultimately, I mean,
You want to know
we
how
can't
I
take
live
it
it,
with us.
Greg, or how my
Yeah,
wife live and I live it? No, I'm just kidding.
I want to know you, Eric. I think you're alluding to it, the other way
No.
around. But
um, I probably am too far on the spectrum of reinvest
got
as
it.
much of it as possible.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't enjoy spending money too much.
Mm-hmm.
Although I will tell you, I actually have a list of things that I do enjoy spending money on.
Okay.
And then if it's not on that list, I don't actually enjoy spending money on it. So,
Well, Eric, well, hold on though. Why though? And again,
yeah.
understanding the way that you're wired, this could help others have
Mm-hmm.
these behaviors or attempt to be like Eric in a
Mm-hmm.
way.
Well, because remember the way that we allocate money is connected to emotion and what money we believe does for us or gives us.
Mhm.
So I like to be crystal clear on when I spend it or when I get it, what does it do for me emotionally?
Got it.
What
Okay.
does it provide me from a psychology standpoint?
Mhm.
Therefore, am I willing to give up the psychology that I'm seeking in
Mm.
exchange for whatever I'm buying? So
Wow. Okay.
the things that I oddly like to spend money on, and most of the time, by the way, these things don't make sense,
Mhm.
and they only need to make sense to you. They
Well said.
don't need to make sense to me, because how
Uh-huh.
you receive that psychological benefit or how you
Mhm.
receive that peace is different than me. So I like a clean house.
Mm.
So if given the option, I would much rather invest money into a clean home, which means then investing into someone who helps out here at the house.
Mhm.
And I like nice hotel rooms, but
Okay.
I have no problem sitting in the back row of an airplane.
Huh.
So first class is not something I'll spend money on, but I will absolutely upgrade a hotel room always.
Wow. Huh.
And so there are things that I would rather spend money on and then not spend any money at all on. It all
Sure.
just is what emotion does this create when I spend it?
Mm.
Do I want more of that or less of that?
I love that example, and I think everybody can apply that to whatever that means to them. Ultimately, going back to the validation standpoint, forget the validation. You're doing this for yourself. You're making these very personal decisions on money. It's a very specific conversation. That's why we're having it. I mean, when we talk about the path to wealth, you're laying it out, Eric. So the last segment into here, unless if there's anything else with the multiply section, is transfer it. So
Yeah.
what do you mean by that, Eric?
Well, at the end of the day, you have a few different options. As at some point in time, all of us die, believe it or not, Greg.
Mhm.
Uh, and so
Gonna happen.
they tell me that you can't take it with you, and therefore you've got to have some plan on how you will transfer it.
Mhm.
And there are options of how you can transfer the money,
Mhm.
and there are different strategies, and then there are different tactics for transfer. So, kind of the step up of this is that you want to have a will as base level one of transfer. Of course, not financial advice, right? And then you want to then have insurance that protects your income from disability, and liability. Okay, so I want to have some sort of insurance plan in place in order to protect me from disability and liability.
Hmm.
And then I want to have a marital agreement in place. If the most costly thing I can do is who I marry, then it makes sense to have a marital agreement. There's two types of marital agreements, a
Hmm.
prenup and a postnup. And so if I'm thinking about protecting it, having a marital agreement in place, it makes more sense to, with calm, rational thinking, decide how you would allocate things in the event that your marriage went south. You
Mhm.
should decide when you're upfront and rational, and therefore you make better decisions for
Mhm.
everyone when everyone gets along, with the goal being that you never have to come in contact with needing a pre or post nut.
Mhm.
And and then you have corporations that provide you with both taxation, privacy, and liability protection. Taxation, privacy, and liability protection. You have trusts, which create some privacy, some certainty, and liability. The certainty is after you die, it's been determined that this is the certain way in which the assets and wealth will be divided. And then you have nonprofit foundations, and
Okay.
that's both taxation, privacy, liability, and certainty.
Mm.
And therefore, as you start to think about, once you get your wealth to a level of needing to protect it, to transfer it, then you have various vehicles for how you can build that transfer and protection strategy together, so that it either goes to your next of kin or next generations, or it goes to causes that you're passionate about.
Hmm. And the way that you break that down in fundamentals, it makes perfect sense. And it's not, look, the morbid side of death, as to your point, it's going to happen to everyone, unless if you happen to be a living, breathing, or I should say, the undead
That's
vampire.
right.
If that's the case. it's going to happen to everybody, but nobody really wants to think about it or talk about it. I think that you mention a really powerful point too for anybody out there who is, in a positive and a beautiful relationship, with a significant other. What's your advice on that conversation, Eric?
Yeah.
Because the thought process behind it, you've got, at least to me, two schools of thoughts. One that's a level-headed and totally understood as to what's going on and why this is here, and this is actually to protect and not to hurt. And then you've got an emotional side of it, which is, why are we even talking about this? Because we're never going to go down this
Sure.
road, even though more than 50% of marriages end in divorce, statistically. So how do you have that conversation, or what would you say to the Disruptance audience, looking at it from that perspective on the transfer side of it for that segment?
Yeah. I mean, Lauren and I have one, so it was pretty. I can just firsthand go through the conversation. It was great, and the reason why it's great is because we started from this place, Greg, and the place was, what is the goal? What is the goal of having a prenup? It's not what most people think it is. The mistake is thinking it's so that I keep mine and you get yours.
Exactly. Right.
The actual goal of a prenup is to stay married and happy forever. Not the opposite. It's not, if we don't, what will happen? It's actually the opposite, which is, how do we actually stay happy and stay married forever? Well, you know what we should do is we should build a contingency plan of, if that doesn't happen, what are the potential repercussions of that not being the case? Because if we both agree that we're actually into this so that we can stay happy and married forever, then wouldn't it be awesome if we put a plan together for how to do that? So you think about, okay, well, what are all the things that might cause that not to happen? And should we build a contingency plan in advance for, if those things occur, these will be the results as a byproduct of that. So things that most don't even think about, which would be, I'll give you an example. I said, you know what? I don't think your parents worked their entire adult life in order to give their net worth to your ex-husband. So can we agree that I probably should not, if we got divorced, I should not be entitled to half of your parents' adult working life and whatever they have left after they pass?
Wow.
And anyone who is sensible says, yeah, I think that makes sense. You're right. I think that they don't want to actually write a check to, after they're dead, to my daughter's ex-husband. Right. And so I said, well, great. Do you think that my parents did the same thing? So therefore, should we take that pile of whatever it may be and set it aside and say, okay, that's also excluded. And therefore, we won't create animosity disputes later, because rational people believe that your parents wouldn't want to write checks to an ex and mine wouldn't either. Awesome. Yeah. That was easy.
Makes
Seems
no
pretty
sense.
principally fair. And then you go, oh, well, you know what? We both have reputations and we both have livelihoods. And so it probably wouldn't be good for two married people to go on social media and talk shit about each other.
Ooh.
So maybe what we should do is we should create a plan of how that might impact the relationship and potentially impact part of an agreement. Right. And so you just go through and think about, well, what are the things that might cause this thing to fail? What are things that seem unreasonable and might actually impact the overarching goal, which are staying married and being happy? So it didn't start from the place of this is yours and this is mine. It was actually from the opposite of, how do we make this as successful as possible? Well, the way to do that is you have what's called a prenuptial disagreement. It just so happens they call them prenuptial agreements.
I love that example, Eric, and I don't think very many people talk about that. But again, going down the path to wealth, that's a part of it, right? Is keeping it, also, losing it or transferring it in that segment. And it's fascinating to me. I think that it's important to have a healthy relationship under any circumstances. Communication is key, but also being on the same page and understanding where you're coming from. I think that this is huge. Any other thoughts with the path to wealth, Eric? I mean, going back at it, and let's just say if you had a time machine traveling back in time and say, hey, young Eric, what would you do? What would you say? Is there anything that you didn't already cover?
I don't think that there's anything that I would change about what my path has been, because it's worked out okay. And then secondarily is, I think I would understand, I think our very first episode, Greg, in season 2, is we talked about principles. And at the end of the day, Einstein has this theory that if you can't explain it simply, you just don't understand it. And therefore, if you can't understand the smallest fundamental building blocks of money and the path to wealth, continue to reinvest in the fundamental truths of wealth building, because it's actually a simple subject. It's a simple subject when you understand that there really are only 2 initial types of capital: human capital and then capital. It's the money you make by trading your time and your energy, and then the money you make from the money you previously made. What do you do with them from there? How do you ensure that you keep it? How do you ensure then that you multiply it? How do you protect it? And then what do you do to give it away to either the next generation or to causes that matter? When you bucket them into those 5 separate ways of thinking about wealth, it becomes much more simple and clear. Then you can start to take action on each one of those 5 pillars and start to actually build it and achieve what money does for you.
Eric, again, this is kind of a reoccurring message throughout Disruptance, and to me is really kind of looking at it from an executed game plan, not necessarily taking it as it comes or seeing how things go, but everything is intentional with you and the way that everything is built and designed, from your organization to team to every way and form and fashion. This will be the last Gordon Gekko quote of today's episode.
Okay.
Throwing that in there, if there's a pop-up of what is it, Michael Douglas's head that can pop up with his hair slicked back and the suspenders, that'd be good right now. But I think this is pertinent to wrap up your thought right here. Again, from Gordon Gekko: I don't throw darts at a board. I bet on a sure thing. Read Sun Tzu, The Art of War. Every battle is won before it is ever fought. And I think that's what you're saying here.
That's right.
I mean, wealth and the path to wealth is a battle. And I think that to have a planned execution to really yield a result is what you laid out for everybody here today, Eric. And I love it. Very good, for sure.
And that's next, right? Is the Art of War. I mean, that would be the thing that you go read next, is The Art of War.
That's
such a good book.
It's there. So I can't thank you enough, my friend. As always, another great episode. Can't wait for the next one for sure.
Thanks, Greg.
Take care, everybody. We'll see you on the next one.